Hi everyone, my name is Emilia Holopainen and I'm here together with my colleague Heidi Tiainen. We want to warmly welcome you all to this webinar on student athlete and sports scholarship opportunities in the US on behalf of the Fulbright Finland Foundation. The Fulbright Finland Foundation is an independent, private and not-for-profit foundation based here in Helsinki, and we specialize in cultural exchanges between Finland and the US. We provide advising, training, and information services for students, researchers, working professionals, and for Finnish higher education institutions. We offer numerous grant programs for different purposes and also, for example, for undergraduate studies in the US. And later this week, we will share more information with you about the opportunities for undergraduate students together with this webinar recording. Now I want to welcome our first guest speaker today, Elizabeth Thompson, who is the Associate Director of International Outreach and Strategic Partnerships at NCAA Eligibility Center. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us. This webinar today has a lot of information in it, so if I move through it quickly, please know that you will be emailed the PDF to this slide deck that will have hyperlinks to all of the resources that I'm going to cover today. So as they mentioned, I am Elizabeth Thompson. I am our Associate Director for International Outreach and Strategic Partnerships with the NCAA Eligibility Center. Things that I'm going to cover today are a brief understanding of the U.S. educational system, what the NCAA Eligibility Center is, some pointers for choosing an NCAA school and coverage of the recruiting process for NCAA-sponsored sports and what sports we offer. We'll walk through the registration requirements that are required in order to compete for an NCAA school, what are core courses, so what subjects you need to be studying in secondary school, the grade point average conversions for US and the requirements, the minimum grade point average requirement in order to be eligible to receive a scholarship for an NCAA Division I or Division II school. And then we'll talk about certification outcomes for both Division I and Division II, and then we'll wrap up with some resources that we have briefly. So the first thing that I want to touch on that most people ask me when I am overseas doing outreach and presentations is, what is the NCAA and what is our role? So the NCAA stands for the National Collegiate Athletic Association. We are a governing body for university sports in the United States. We're one of a few different governing bodies that exist. So our job is to oversee the rules and the requirements that are made by the NCAA member schools who are a part of our organization. So we're made up of over 1,100 colleges and universities, and it's our job to fairly and consistently apply those rules to all of those NCAA schools and student athletes to ensure a fair and equitable playing environment for all student athletes in schools. So here's an example of a few different governing bodies in the United States. There's the NAIA and the NJCAA, which are other organizations that have other schools that are part of their membership. So the NCAA is just one, like I said, of various different governing bodies for collegiate and university sports in the United States. And our particular organization is made up of 3 divisions, Division I, II, and III, and schools do not move up and down in division. So I think that's something that people are used to in European soccer and other sports, or football as you call it. But if a school is a Division I program, it remains a Division I program. They typically do not move up and down based on performance. There's a few other factors that I'll talk about which determine what division a school is. So how the Eligibility Center, which is where I work, plays into this is that it's our job. We are a department within the NCAA, and all student athletes that wish to participate for an NCAA school must be registered with the NCAA Eligibility Center and then certified eligible to compete. So what we do is we review your academics from year 9 through secondary school graduation, as well as your sports participation history, in order to ensure that you are an amateur in your sport and not a professional. So there, like I said, there are over 1,100 colleges and universities across the United States that are NCAA schools across our 3 divisions. So when you get the PDF and the recording of it, be sure to use this interactive map in order to search for different schools based on your sport or a particular degree that you want to study that will help you navigate and search the different schools that are out there. So I talked earlier about the fact that the NCAA is made up of 3 different divisions, and that has to do a lot with the size of the athletic facilities, the student athlete body, as far as how many students are on that campus. So your Division I programs are larger colleges and universities, which are made up of upwards of 30 or 40,000 students on campus. Division II schools are a little smaller, maybe somewhere between, 3 to 5,000 or 8,000 students on campus, and Division III tends to be your smaller colleges and universities. But you'll also notice that Division III actually has the most student athlete participation. Over 40% of our NCAA member schools are actually Division III schools. So while Division I and Division II are the only 2 divisions that offer sports scholarships, Division III has many opportunities still to participate in a sport at the university level. It's just that the scholarships are academic or merit-based and not based on athletic participation at the school. And then as far as what sports the NCAA offers that are considered championship sports, we support 24 different sports across men's and women's and host 90 championships in those sports. So this is a list here of all of the sports that are considered NCAA sports for scholarship purposes. All other sports would be at a club or intramural level. And then one of the most common questions that we receive is, how do I apply for a sports scholarship? And that's a great question to ask, because here in the States, you actually do not apply for a sports scholarship. College coaches, which the coach will be talking more about the recruiting process today, recruit for their school's programs based on performance and the positions that are needed at the school. So just know that there's not an application, so to speak, for NCAA schools to apply for the sports scholarship. You can reach out and we'll talk about some best practices to promote yourself, but those scholarships are actually something that are offered by the coaches. And then things that you'll want to consider when determining which school that you want to choose is look at the size of the school, where it's located. So the United States is a very large country. You're going to have schools in very large inner cities. You're going to have schools in rural parts of America that just don't have a lot around it. And then schools that offer different majors or minors for what you choose to study and what degree you choose. So make sure you're looking at that, asking about the full cost of attendance to find out if the scholarship you're being offered covers the full cost or if you're going to be required to make up some of that. And then we'll talk more about admissions and how that's a separate process from being eligible for your sport and your scholarship. But be sure to research what are the admissions requirements to get into that school, which often differ from NCAA initial eligibility requirements, which are just the eligibility requirements to compete and play for that school that first year. I always recommend to international students to also see what support system is there as far as international admissions offices and what cultural and affiliations the school might have. Some schools might have a religious affiliation, and what does that mean for day-to-day life on that campus, and does that align with your personal choices and values? And then look at what the student to faculty ratio is. Is it a school that has, classroom sizes of 30 to 1, or is it closer to 400 to 1, and how that could impact your experience at that college or university? And then be sure to ask questions about playing time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the hyperlink here that you'll get the PDF to is a link to that interactive map so that you can search different schools. When it comes to sports scholarships, it's important to know that roughly only 2% of all secondary school athletes actually end up being awarded an athletic scholarship to compete at a university. So this is why your academics and how you perform in secondary school is so important, because that can really play a factor into the amount of scholarship and aid that you can receive. A lot of times coaches will want to supplement or put together a 50% academic scholarship and a 50% athletic scholarship because of the limited amount of athletic scholarships that a school has per team and per roster. Oftentimes having an academic being a stronger student academically gives you an advantage over another athlete that might have been comparable in your position or in your sport, who they aren't able to offer an academic scholarship for. So if a coach can help you cover the full cost of attendance with 50 or 60% academics and then less on the athletic side, that just makes you more recruitable in that process oftentimes. But be sure to ask if the scholarships are annual scholarships or if it's a one-year renewable, multi-year, full scholarship. What does that mean? Does it cover tuition, housing, room and board, food, cost, the full cost of attendance? And then also if you're on a scholarship plan that is part athletic and part academic, what are the expectations to maintain both of those? Because it may be a lower GPA to maintain one of the parts of the scholarship than it is the other. So those are important questions to ask in the recruiting process. I won't spend a ton of time on recruiting here. These are just some resources because I know Coach is going to be talking more about the recruiting process. So these are just things that the NCAA defines as recruiting. So if any of these things are occurring between you and a university coach, then you are being actively recruited. Some of that can happen as early as year 9, but it's typically the summer after year 10 going into year 11 when that active recruiting can occur, whether it's phone calls or text messages, WhatsApp messages, emails, direct messages on social media, etc. Those are all things that are considered actively recruiting. For the NCAA's purpose, in order to be certified by the NCAA as being eligible academically, which we'll talk about what those requirements are, and as an amateur in your sport, you must be placed on the school's institutional request list. That's an IRL. And so in order to be certified, you have to be on the school's IRL, and we'll talk in a minute about how you assist the school in making sure you're placed on their school's request list. So each sport in each division has different recruiting calendars, and on this hyperlink here can take you to our website on.ncaa.com/recruitcal, and it has a great section of different terminologies and resources for you, because you're going to hear a lot of different terms used throughout the recruiting process, things like quiet period, dead period, contact period, evaluation period, offers, verbal offers, written offers. There's just a lot of different terms out there. And so this guide will help you understand what all of those mean. It will also help you understand that on your sport and the division level you're looking to potentially go to, when coaches are allowed to contact you and in what method they're allowed to contact you. And these are just a few recommendations of things that you should ask in the recruiting process. So what additional responsibilities are there for you to be a member of that team? What training and medical expenses are included? What is that coach's philosophy and style? What degree completion support is available? So one of the things that's important to know, and there's a whole list there that you can read through while I talk about this, is that student athletes actually graduate at a higher rate than just a student at these universities and campuses. And that's because of the amount of support that you are given as a member of the athletic department and as a member of that athletic team. So there oftentimes in the first year at university, there's mandatory study tables each day to make sure that you're staying on top of your work. You'll be given athletic or academic advisors and tutors and all of these resources that are available to you to ensure that you succeed. So there's a lot of different things that are looked at in the process for a university to be able to go on to the postseason and play. And a lot of that has to do with their graduation rates and their overall grade point average and progress towards degree. So there are a lot of NCAA rules in place for the colleges and universities to ensure that their athletes are succeeding in the classroom. So that's why you will have that support system around you to ensure that you are succeeding in the classroom as well as getting to play your sport. So some best practices that we always encourage students with is talk to your support system. If you have someone in your circle or in your life that knows about the U.S. university system and has seen you compete or play in your sport, ask them what level of competition they think you should aim for, whether it's Division I, Division II, or Division III. Be sure to check your email. So we'll talk in a moment about the registration process with the NCAA, but how we communicate with you of information that's needed or missing on your NCAA account in order to determine your eligibility is via tasks. And those tasks prompt an email to you to tell you something is outstanding or missing. So be sure to check the email address that you use to register often. Also use that interactive map to choose the best NCAA school that's the right fit for you, and research the admissions requirements to those NCAA schools that you're interested in attending, and also research your division and sport specific recruiting periods that we talked about. So when you register with the NCAA, you're going to be given a 10-digit NCAA ID number. That is your ID number that remains with you throughout the recruiting process, throughout your time at a university. Once you register, you have that account for life. And that's the ID number that you would want to give to coaches. So you can email coaches to express your interest in their program or playing for their team at that university. And you always want to be sure to include your name, your NCAA ID number, and then your position and sport that you're interested in. We always recommend starting with emailing assistant coaches because we understand that head coaches are very busy. But if you go to a university's website, go to their athletic department page and then click on their staff directory, typically you can find the emails of the coaching staff on there. And I would just suggest a sports resume, anything with information on your performance in your sport, depending on if it's an individual sport or a team sport. We also see students that will have like highlight videos or links to YouTube videos to show their performance in their sport, but then also including information on when your graduation year is, when you plan to enroll at that school, and any further information of teams that you've played on, rankings that you have, as well as your academic performance. So how are you doing in school? What is your grade point average? Have you registered and been certified by the Eligibility Center? All of those are very important things. So next we're going to talk about the requirements. So once you are being actively recruited by a NCAA school to compete for that school, what are the things that you need to do next? So it's important to know that there are 3 requirements to play university sports. 1 is that you must graduate secondary school in your home country. 2 is that you must be certified eligible by the NCAA Eligibility Center. And then 3rd is that you must be admitted into that university that you ultimately want to attend. This is just a great interactive map. I suggest if you have your smartphones out, take a picture of it. But again, we'll be emailing all of these slides out to you today. But this really just walks you through from the starting line, which is registering with the NCAA, through the finish line, which is arriving to and attending that university and competing for it, step by step, the big things that you need to take care of and that will come along the way in order for you to be eligible to compete for that school and travel to that university. So the first step in the process is to register with the NCAA. And where you do that is on our website, which is eligibilitycenter.org. And this is what the website looks like. The photo and the sport in the background tend to change, but overall, this is our website. You can register even as young as year 7 and year 8, and we'll talk about what the different account options are. So when you get to our website and you click on that register here button in the middle of the page, you're going to be given 3 different account options. So the free profile page, academic and amateurism certification account, and our amateurism only certification account. So now we'll talk about what each of those are. Our free profile page is just that. It's free. There is no cost associated with it. You'll see the QR code on the screen here that you can scan in order to create that free profile page. We recommend this, again, for those students as young as year 7, year 8, year 9, that they aren't really sure yet that they want to come play in the States and if they want to attend attend an NCAA school or not. So there's no loss to you by creating that free profile page. That gets you in our system so that you're aware of the subjects that you need to be studying, the requirements for eligibility, and what you need to do each year to stay on track in order to become eligible eventually to compete for an NCAA school. And again, there's no registration fee with that. At any point in time, if you become actively recruited and you become more serious about attending an NCAA school, there's a button in that free profile page that says transition my account, and that's when you can transition it over to the second account type here that we have. And this is the account type that is required in order to compete at a Division I or Division II school. So this account has a $160 fee. It is a one-time fee for international students, and that fee is based on where you've attended school outside of the United States and the sports teams that you have played for. It has nothing to do with, a lot of times people ask if it has to do with residency and if you are a citizen of the United States or not. It does not. It has to do with where you've attended school and the teams that you've participated on. And if that is outside of the United States, it would be that international student fee. This account, again, it's required to go on any visits to schools, to end up signing a national letter of intent, which is an agreement between you and the school. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And to receive any athletic scholarship, you have to have this account type and be certified through this account type. So the third account type is for international students who are planning to compete at a Division III school. So as I mentioned earlier, Division III does not offer athletic scholarships. Therefore, they determine their own academic requirements. However, you are still required to be certified as an amateur in that sport, and that's what this account type is for. So it's a one-time US $70 fee. Once you have that account, again, you have it for life. That's a one-time fee. It's not an annual fee, and it would be required for students looking to go Division III. We also do have fee waiver options, so just know that we never want the registration fee to stop you from being able to compete and pursue your dream to play at an NCAA school. So you can click on the hyperlink here, and you can also find it in the registration process for criteria on if you would be eligible to receive a fee waiver. Okay, now we're going to talk about core courses. So if you have those smartphones out, you can scan this QR code here, and this will take you to one of our resources that covers what is an NCAA core course. So in the international space, we see different course titles from different countries all across the world. So this is a kind of all-inclusive resource that can help you determine whether the courses that you studied would count towards the requirements that I'm about to talk about. So in order to know if you are eligible for Division I or Division II, you have to have 16 core course credits in these areas. So a core course is something such as English and or native language in your country, mathematics studied at the Algebra 1 level or higher. So typically any math taken in year 9 and up that's not vocational in nature typically falls into that, but you would want to use that resource that I just had pulled up for you to sort through your titles to make sure they would count. Science courses such as natural or physical sciences, biologies, chemistries, physics, earth sciences, all of those would count as a science. We also require 2 credits of a social science. Those would be courses such as history, government, civics, law. All of those could count as social sciences. Any world languages that you took in addition to English or native language would count, as well as any non-doctrinal comparative religion or philosophy courses. So a general philosophy or religion and not something specific to one area or doctrine. And then we have a hyperlink there that also takes you to that the same link that QR code did that would help you navigate core courses. So this is the breakdown of where those 16 credits have to be. And if you study English and Finnish, for example, each year, or if you were to study any other language that would be considered a native language for 4 years, then by default, you could potentially have 8 credits, one of each from each year. And if you study mathematics each year, that would give you 4. So if you're in an area of general academic studies, it's not difficult to meet these requirements. It's where you have to really watch is if you end up choosing a vocational path of studies that sometimes there can be deficiencies in these areas. And then for country-specific website resources, you can scan this QR code, which will take you to our webpage, and then you can click on the tab for Europe, and then you'll see the tab there for Finland. If by chance there's anyone joining us on the webinar today that's studying, for example, International Baccalaureate or any other educational system outside of the Finnish system, you can still find that by clicking on Europe and scrolling down to the I's. That's where you would find International Baccalaureate. If we have anyone attending an American school abroad, you would actually search our website under the help feature for high schools to search for your particular American school abroad, which follows just slightly different requirements. But when you scan that QR code, it will take you to this website and you'll see the different areas of the world listed right there below. So you would click on Europe, which would take you to this resource for Finland. So this is a great resource that tells you what is year 9 typically called, what is the expected timeline for graduation, what is considered a native language towards those academic requirements, and what are acceptable forms of proof of high school graduation or secondary school graduation. So these are all resources that are available for over 180 different countries. Within that, you will also find information on the US grade point average. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about is the GPA or grade point average that you need, the minimum that you need in order to be eligible to receive that scholarship and compete. So every school's admissions office is going to be different as to what they require, and most likely will require higher than what this minimum grade point average is. But just know that when we're referring to the grading scale, we're referring to this US grading scale, which is on a 4.0 system, which means A's are the highest grade that can be earned, which is a 4.0. B's are a 3.0, C's are a 2.0, D's are a 1.0, and F's are failures. So NCAA requirements require a 2.3 GPA for Division 1 in the average of those 16 core courses, and Division 2 requires a 2.2. And this is an example of how some of the grading scales from Finland convert to that. So for example, you'll see the 10-point scale here. If you're getting grades between a 7 and an 8, those would be considered B's on the US grading scale, which would be a 3.0 GPA. So as long as you're getting 7s or higher, then you should not have any issues meeting that 2.3 GPA requirement. You'll also see a few other grading scales listed there. There are more in that PDF and that resource for Finland, but I just wanted to provide a few examples here today of how we convert those grading scales over to the US system. So next we're going to talk about the certification outcomes for Division 1 and Division 2. So for Division 1, we'll focus on our qualifier, academic, redshirt, and non-qualifier today. So in order to be a qualifier, which a qualifier is defined as being eligible to receive athletics aid, practice, and compete for that NCAA school immediately upon arrival to that university's campus, you must earn those 16 core course credits in the required areas that I mentioned. For US students, there is a 10-7 progression. So any students attending American schools abroad or US curriculum, just know that that requirement is there, but solely international students are exempt from that. And then in those 16 core course credits, you must earn a GPA, a grade point average of a 2.3 or higher in those courses in order to be eligible to be a qualifier. And then lastly, submitting an acceptable form of proof of graduation, which that list would be on the PDF that we just showed. So Division 1 also has a term called an academic redshirt. An academic redshirt is a student who completed the 16 core courses, but didn't get to that 2.3 GPA, so maybe only got to a 2.0. So anywhere between a 2.0 to a 2.29 for Division 1 would be considered an academic redshirt. And what that means is that you can still receive your scholarship the first year, and you can practice in the first term. So whatever terms that school is on. So if they're on semesters, you can practice in the first semester. However, you are not eligible to compete. So you cannot compete in competition that first year. And in order to continue to be able to practice with the team in subsequent terms, you must maintain a certain number of credit hours in GPA, and the university will work with you on what those requirements are. That's what we consider to be continued eligibility. So an academic redshirt is a student athlete who did not meet the full qualifier criteria, so they can receive their scholarship and practice, but not compete. And then lastly, Division I non-qualifier. Obviously, we don't want this to be the outcome for any student, but it's important to know what this means. So a non-qualifier is a student athlete who did not meet any of those requirements for eligibility. So in that first year at an NCAA Division I school, they would not be eligible to receive that scholarship. They could not compete or practice with the team. So there's no affiliation with the athletic department and scholarship in that first year as a non-qualifier. Next, we'll talk about Division II. So a Division II qualifier, very similar to Division I, 16 core course credits, must be a high school graduate, and then that GPA is just slightly different. So for Division I, we require a 2.3. For Division II, we require a 2.2 GPA. And if you complete those three things, then you would be eligible to receive that scholarship, which we refer to as athletics aid, practice and compete immediately upon arrival to the campus and university. And then Division II partial qualifier. So this is one of the great things that Division II changed in the last few years, which was that as long as you have graduated from secondary school in your country and submitted an acceptable form of proof of graduation at minimum for Division II, you're eligible for that scholarship and to practice with the team in the first year. So you can then go on, if you have done well in your first year at university and earned a high enough GPA and taken the minimum required credit hours, you can go on to be eligible to compete for that school in subsequent years after it. So if you go into NCAA colleges or universities with full eligibility, that's a 5-year clock to use 4 seasons. So it's very common for students to redshirt or be a partial qualifier that first year, which is where you get to practice with the team, acclimate to the campus life and being a full-time student athlete, and then potentially still have 4 full seasons of competition after that. So if Division I didn't work out for you for any reason, don't rule out the opportunity for Division II, because there's still a great opportunity to receive potentially a full scholarship to be eligible to play and attend a university. And then this is just an overview of the initial eligibility requirements that I talked about. So if you scan this QR code, it will take you to our initial eligibility flyer, which breaks down those credit requirements, grade point average, and step-by-step recommendations that we think that you should do in each year 9 through 12 to stay on track to be eligible to compete for an NCAA school. In Division III, so I mentioned earlier, Division III does not offer academic scholarships or their sports scholarships. Everything is academic or merit based. So what that means is that each Division III school determines its own academic requirements, admissions, and financial aid. So you would want to work with the Division III school if you're interested in attending that to determine what they require to be admitted to that school. But do know that you would have to create that amateurism only account type and be certified as an amateur. And part of that process oftentimes does require you to submit academic documents to the NCAA. So don't be confused if you're thinking, well, I'm going Division III and I just need an amateur status. Why are they requiring my academic documents? The reason for that is because part of the amateurism evaluation that we do for all 3 divisions looks at your expected date of graduation, which is based on when you initially enrolled in year 9 and your type of diploma that you earned. So you often have to provide those complete academic records so that we can make sure that you have enrolled at a college or university full time, so that within that 1 year, typically depending on your sport, and then that determines how many seasons you have to compete at the NCAA level. So if you're wondering why we're asking for academic records, they are used to determine your seasons of competition, which is part of that amateurism evaluation. And then I just want to remind again that the admissions process is a separate and parallel process to NCAA eligibility. So while you're applying through the NCAA to be certified to compete for NCAA schools, you also need to do your research and apply and be admitted to those NCAA schools that you're interested in attending. So being certified with the NCAA does not mean that you're admitted to the schools. Being admitted to the schools does not mean you're certified to compete for those schools. It's 2 separate processes processes that are happening at the same time. So just keep that in mind when you're going about this process, and be sure to ask the university admissions office about the full cost of attendance, if there's any financial aid available to you, and then ask them about standardized test scores. So they're no longer required for NCAA purposes, and I think we have a slide coming up here that'll talk more about that. But test scores are no longer required for NCAA initial eligibility, meaning to compete for the school, you do not have to submit an SAT or ACT. However, many admissions offices have gone back to either requiring it or being test optional, which means you can submit it if it will help your admissions record, or some schools have done away with it completely. Other schools may often require a TOEFL or an English as a foreign language English proficiency exam. We at the NCAA do not require that, but admissions may require it. So it's just very important to ask all of those questions and do your research in the admissions process to see what you need to do to be admitted to the school. So then we'll talk about what you need to submit to the NCAA in order to be deemed, for us to do your academic certification and hopefully deem you eligible for that scholarship and to compete. So what you need to submit are all academic records for school years 9 and up in the native language. We also require certified line-by-line English translations of all academic records. And then you must submit an acceptable form of proof of graduation. So whether that's your diploma with certificates, exam certificate results, you would have seen the list in the PDF for Finland as to what are the acceptable lists. If you've attended any other type of educational system, such as the International Baccalaureate or American Schools Abroad, just be sure to reference those resources for what you need to submit. And again, we do not return copies of documents to students, so be sure you're not sending anything that's an original. We ask for certified copies because we cannot return those. If English is not the native language, certified copies must be submitted along with those line-by-line English translations. And then there's a few options for what's acceptable for how to get those translations done. It can be a translation company. It could be, for example, an English teacher at your secondary school. If your secondary school is able to provide the records in the native language, and if they can provide an English copy, that's acceptable. Also, if you're not able to find any of those resources, then the NCAA school recruiting you could use a professor of the language at their school to provide that translation as well. But it should be a word-for-word, line-by-line translation of your documents, and it should not be converting any of your grades into the US system. So if your transcript shows that you got 7s or 8s or 9s, they should not be converting that on the translations to A's or B's. They should be keeping that as 7s or 8s or 9s as the grade earned. They should just be translating the words on the document from the native language to English. And then how to submit those records. So you can as of right now, you, the student, can email your records from the email address that you created your NCAA account with, and you can email those to ec-processing@ncaa.org. And this is only for international students, international high schools, and issuing bodies that can submit them to this email address. Be sure your name and your NCAA ID number is in the subject line of that email so we know which account to associate it with. But also keep in mind that students being able to provide their own records was a temporary process that was some relief that was available during COVID, because we know that schools shut down. It was difficult to get in touch with different educational authorities. So that process of allowing students to submit their own records will expire on April 30th. So for all records submitted May 1st and after, those must come directly from the source, which is either your secondary school, ministry, issuing bodies, etc. A secondary school can submit on your behalf if they have a valid email address. So I would highly recommend getting registered for your NCAA account now and getting your documents submitted now before that May 1st deadline comes. And then again, these things are all hyperlinked in here, as is the word mail, which will provide you a mailing address should your school not be able to email the records, or if you have to request a certified copy and provide a mailing address, you can find all of that information there. I mentioned this earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but just know that beginning this past January and going forward, test scores were permanently removed from the NCAA initial eligibility process, which means for Division I and Division II eligibility, an SAT or ACT test score is not required. However, it may be required at that college or university, or it may help you obtain more scholarships. So if there are academic or merit-based scholarships, having one of those tests may help you in that process. Next, we're going to touch on a few resources. So the National Letter of Intent. We get a lot of questions about this. This is a financial aid agreement between you and an NCAA Division I or Division II school. And what this National Letter of Intent does is it is a binding agreement for 1 year between you and that school. It's voluntary, so you do not have to sign a National Letter of Intent with a school, but if you choose to do so, that ends the recruiting process for you. Once you sign with a particular school, no other NCAA schools are allowed to have any type of contact or communication with you. It does provide you with athletics financial aid for a minimum of 1 academic year at that school, as long as you are eventually admitted to that school and that you're deemed eligible for financial aid under NCAA rules through the NCAA Eligibility Center. If you'd like to find more information on the National Letter of Intent program and what all that means by signing with a school, you can visit the website nationalletter.org. So transfer students, we would hope that a student chooses the right school and is able to stay with that school all 4 or 5 years and graduate, but we understand that things happen that make a student want to transfer or require a transfer. So just understand that there are resources out there to help you navigate that process if you end up going to one NCAA school and choose to transfer to another. So there is a resource for a 2-year transfer guide. That's if maybe you chose to attend in a junior college or a 2-year school before coming to an NCAA school. So that guide will help you navigate that process of transferring from a 2-year. Or if you're transferring from a university in your home country, that would be what we consider a 4-4 transfer. So you would use the 4-year transfer guide that's listed there. You would also use that guide if you were trying to transfer from one NCAA school to another. That would be the guide that you use, but you can find more information there on our website, which is on.ncaa.com/transfer. So name, image, and likeness, we get a lot of questions as this is something new in the past few years for NCAA student athletes. NCAA rules do say that student athletes can benefit from their name, image, and likeness, but as international students, I would highly encourage you to work with the compliance office of the NCAA school recruiting you before considering signing any type of name, image, and likeness deal. You can find more information on our website, ncaa.org/NIL. And the reason I just advise you to proceed with caution is because there are a lot of immigration rules that prevent international students that are studying in the United States on an F1 visa from earning income or working during their time in the States. And so some of those NIL deals could cause issues if you're earning what we consider to be active income on US soil. So you don't ever want to sign anything that could jeopardize your amateurism or that could jeopardize your visa status and require you to be deported. So always work with the NCAA school recruiting you for best practices and what they suggest or say is or is not allowable. But as a general rule, NCAA rules do say that student athletes can benefit from their name, image, and likeness. And you can find more information on that on our social media, which I have a slide for in just a moment. If you do not already, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to our international newsletter. All of these resources will also be emailed out when we send these slides to you, which have all of the hyperlinks to all of the pages and resources that we covered throughout this presentation. But I encourage you to scan the QR code and sign up for our newsletter. Anytime there's updates or changes or important reminders for international student athletes, we email the registered student. But if you're someone that is assisting students in the process, whether it be an individual or a family member or a school, we just encourage you to sign up for that newsletter so that you get those reminders as well. And then this is the QR code for our international academic standards, which if you scanned the one earlier for Finland, that will take you to the country-specific website. We just wanted to provide that here again for anyone that did not get it. And then lastly, just be sure to follow us on social media. We have a really great social media team. We just recently in the last year launched a YouTube channel. So we understand that not everyone wants to sit through a full hour-long webinar, and it might be more beneficial to be able to watch a 2 or 3 minute how-to video for different things. So one of the things that you'll have to do in the spring or April time period before enrolling at an NCAA school in the fall is called Request Your Final Amateurism. You'll get an email and a reminder about it, but we have a great YouTube video that's like 2 minutes long, I think, and it helps walk you through step by step in your account how to do that. And there's a handful of other how-to videos on there and informational videos. So I just encourage you, whatever your social media platform of choice is, be sure to follow us on that so that you get those reminders. We all spend way too much time on social media scrolling. So if you are scrolling and see a reminder of something you need to do on your NCAA account, that's a great way to stay on top of things. But then also those how-to videos on YouTube are very helpful. So with that, I will turn it back over to our folks in Finland, and then we'll determine how they want to do question and answers or save those for the end. But if you have any questions and would like to follow up individually about your particular account, this is where you can scan the QR code there to fill out the contact form, and a member of our customer service team will be in touch with you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think we have now we have time for questions, and if you have a question, you can type it to the chat box. And we have there one question that which sports are included, and I think that the question came when you had the Division 3 slide on.
Okay, so the sports that are offered at each school are going to vary by sport. So that list that I provided earlier in the presentation for the 24 different sports would be those. So while we're on here, I'll go back to that slide so that people can see it. And it just covers what sports are offered. Not every school offers all of these sports. I think that's something important to know, is that what schools offer, what sports are going to vary. So you'll just want to check with the schools that you're interested in to see that interactive map is also going to be a great way for you to navigate what programs are out there. So if you're interested in Division 1, volleyball, you can search Division 1 volleyball and it'll show you all of the programs and where they're located all across the United States. We're almost back to it. Sorry, there's so many slides here. But this will help you know these are the sports here. So those are all of the different sports that are offered at NCAA schools. But again, not every school sponsors all of those sports. So it's important to ask.
So this is a good time to ask questions from Elizabeth before Hamed starts. But then there is a question about, does scholarships cover all medical expenses, for example, if you get injured or very sick?
That's a great question. That's something that's important to ask the NCAA school that's recruiting you. Typically, an injury is covered if the injury occurred while playing the sport or training for the sport at the school. However, there are some legislation coming out that the NCAA schools are voting on in January that could provide additional year of medical support even after a student athlete has left their campus for, I think it's like 2 or 3 years they're suggesting. So just know that that's an area that's actually changing to provide more coverage for student athletes. So I would just suggest speaking to the NCAA school, depending on the division that you're interested in attending. I think that there are also different medical coverages that you can select as a student. Like if you were to get sick and have to go to the nurse's office with, a cold or flu and how that works, those are important questions to ask the campus to see if that's covered in the scholarship or not.
And next question. So are vocational studies and the credits what you get from that type of school not enough for NCAA Division 1?
So Division 1 requirements do look at those core academic areas. So that is where you would look to see if that vocational diploma that you are earning is on the list of acceptable diplomas, meaning it allows access to university studies. But the areas and the subjects in which you are required to have to be eligible for scholarship in that first year do require those to be academic core areas and not vocational. So we would be looking for standard English or native language, mathematics, sciences. Vocational subjects do not count towards those academic requirements. And that the reason behind that, we get this question a lot, so I'd like to elaborate just a little bit there, is because of what the core university structure in the United States is. So every college and university is going to have a set of core curriculum that you have to complete in addition to the major that you study. So even if you choose biology as your major at any university in the States, they're still going to require a certain base level knowledge and certain number of courses in your core curriculum at that university in English, in math, in science, etc. So that's why the universities have said these are the minimum academic requirements to set you up for success in that first year at a U.S. college or university based on our university curriculum system.
Then how do I earn those 16 core courses points? For example, do you gain one point from one whole year or 1 point per course?
Sure. So in the resources that were on the presentation, you're going to find information at the end of the presentation. And as I'm talking, I'll try to scroll back to it, that talk about what courses are acceptable as core courses. There's also a credit document on there, and what that will talk about is courses such as English, native language, and mathematics are worth 1 credit unit per year, while other subject areas such as sciences, social sciences, and any of those other core courses, so any additional languages, etc., those are worth 0.5 credits per year. So that's how we would break down the crediting system. If there were any separate crediting system, it would be noted in the PDF for the country. So there are a few countries like France uses coefficients. They have a different crediting, but for the most part, it would be the standard crediting that you would find in the resources at the end, which I'm slowly getting back to here, that would break down those academic requirements and the credit values of each of the core areas for you. So it's the fourth one down that says policy for awarding credit for international academic certification. That will help you navigate how much credit each course should receive.
All right, thank you. Do we still have more questions for Elizabeth? All right, thank you, Elizabeth. It looks like, oh, we have one. So who should I ask which level do I need to aim at?
Yeah, I think that would be something, and maybe the coach that's joining us here in a moment could speak more to that, but lots of different people, I would say, would be your best advice if you have a club team or someone, a coach that's, that's in your inner circle that has experience with sending students over to the United States. That would be a good question there. Some students opt to use recruiting services. That's not a requirement. You can navigate this process on your own, but that is one of the benefits of a recruiting service, is that they do typically know, based on the showcases and things that they offer, where a student's talent level would place them, whether it be Division 1, Division 2, or Division 3. But don't feel afraid to, get those recordings of you playing in a match or a competition and upload those to YouTube and send those in those emails to coaches that you're interested in, and aim for all different divisions to see where you're getting interest. I think that would be a good, helpful way as well. Also looking to see if you know any friends or anyone from your area that is currently playing at the Division 1, 2, or 3 level. I always tell students, if you're, a tennis player, look up a particular Division 1 school or a couple of Division 1 schools and watch a few matches, see how they're playing, see if you feel that you're at that level. And if not, start looking at Division 2 matches, Division 3. So do a little bit of your own research and watch some games or competitions or matches to figure out if you feel that you fit in those. It's a little easier with individual sports like swimming because it's times. So you know how you perform and what your time is in your event or events. So take a look at different teams or programs at the Division 1, 2, and 3 level and where swimmers are or individuals are in your event and what times they're getting to figure out if that's something feasible in the next 3 or 4 years for you of obtaining that type of time. That will give you an idea if you're at that level of competition.
And what about sports that aren't part of the NCAA? Is it possible to join the school sports team? If so, how?
Yeah, and I think that's something that will be great for when Coach comes on here in just a minute to talk about that. So many different schools have lots of different programs that are offered at like a club or a varsity level that offer scholarships for them. So it's just that it's not an NCAA-backed scholarship, which means that there's not a championship that's hosted by and sponsored by the NCAA, but there are many club level sports like men's rugby as an example, where there may be scholarship opportunities available. The process, it's just not governed by the NCAA, which means we don't oversee the rules as it pertains to the scholarships, as it pertains to hosting the championships and competition amongst the schools and universities. But definitely there are opportunities there. But I'll kind of leave the rest of that to the coach to talk about.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. And great if you can share the slides with us.
Definitely.
Afterwards.
Thank you.
And next, we welcome a Fulbright Finland alum, Hamed Ahmed, who is currently an associate head squash coach at Harvard University. Go on.
Hey guys, I'm just gonna share my screen here. All right, hope that you can see it. Hi guys, so I'm Hamed Ahmed. As Emilia was saying there, I'm an associate head squash coach at Harvard University and have been for the last 10 years. I came to the US about 16 years ago as a Fulbright Finland undergraduate grantee. So I spent a total of 6 years in upstate New York at the University of Rochester, 4 years of those as an undergraduate and a Fulbrighter. Just going to quickly sort of talk a little bit about that experience as being a Fulbrighter and coming to the U.S. It was very, very helpful to attend events like these, where you were just getting more information about what it is to be first of all a student in the U.S., then also a student athlete. I think a lot of people associate Fulbright with sort of the scholarship side of things, so you get financial help with your studies in the U.S. But it's actually mostly, I would say, the most benefit that I got, in addition to some financial aid, was this educational and cultural side of things. So the fact that I had a better understanding of what the educational system in the U.S. is. I had a better understanding culturally what a place the U.S. is in general. When I arrived, because of Fulbright, I knew how to open a bank account. I knew how to apply for a social security number, things like that. So that was extremely helpful. And lastly, it's offered a network that I'm obviously still a part of by attending events like these. In 2 weeks' time, I'm actually hosting 6 Fulbrighters who are in Boston this year. And sort of getting them together and getting to know them from Harvard, MIT, and other universities. So it's something that stayed with me all the way up until now, which has been very cool. But yeah, as I said, I was born and raised in Finland, played squash for a long time in Finland, and then got recruited to play at the University of Rochester. I played there for 4 years and became a coach during the following 2 years when I was in grad school. And after those 2 years, I got offered a job here at Harvard University, and I've been a coach here ever since. What I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about 3 sort of big areas. So one, the recruiting timeline for Harvard squash. So I want to emphasize that just because it's, as Elizabeth was saying, it's different for different divisions and different sports. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. I'll also talk to you about things that to keep in mind when applying to universities and when to be in touch and how to be in touch with the coaches. And then a few things as how life looks like and feels like as a student athlete. So again, before I kind of go into this, I want to emphasize that this recruiting process is really just an example of how we do it at Harvard University with the squash teams. And there's a couple of sort of things to keep in mind here, just to make it even more complicated. But Harvard University is technically, it's a Division I school, but it is a part of the Ivy League, and the Ivy League schools actually do not give any athletic scholarships, despite being Division I schools. So there's that one. So I'm not really talking about athletic scholarships during this because it's not really a part of our process. And in addition to that, as you were seeing as you might have noticed from the list of sports from before, squash wasn't a part of that list. So squash is officially not an NCAA sport. It's governed by the College Squash Association, which is separate from NCAA. Having said that, because we are the teams that are a part of the CSA are at institutions that are governed by the NCAA, we still follow a lot of the NCAA rules. So there's going to be, even if you didn't see your sport on that list that Elizabeth was sharing there, I would encourage you to do your research, because there are a lot of sports such as squash that you can compete at a varsity level, both in Division I and Division III schools. But just to give you an idea of how we do recruiting and how it sort of goes from a coach's standpoint and what you might be thinking about when applying. So our initial list, generally speaking, for our squash teams consists of anywhere between 100 and 200 prospective student athletes. We go to the biggest tournaments here nationally, so the U.S. Junior Open and others in America, but also we go to the World Championships, the European Championships, the British Junior Open, things like that internationally. So our list initially is quite large, 100 to 200 prospective student athletes. And the big thing that we start looking at, the big sort of first filter that we look at, we really get, so in squash, the date is September 1st of your junior year, which is your second to last year in high school. That's when we're allowed as coaches to start communicating with student athletes. Again, this is different depending on the division that you're a part of and the sport that you're a part of. So again, this is just really for squash. But the 2 big filters that we look at the academics. So we basically, the first thing that we ask is your high school grades. And if you have taken any testing, so any SATs or ACTs, and we look at those things, and we take a look and sort of give it an estimate of, can we get these through admissions. That's probably the biggest filter. And the second biggest filter is obviously athletics, and the thinking is, can you play in the starting lineup in 2 years' time? So you're obviously a junior in high school at that point. So we're thinking ahead and sort of looking at your foundation as an athlete and your potential for further improvement, and thinking ahead, okay, how do you look like in 2 years' time, and could you play in our starting lineup? Because of these 2 big filters, the academic side and the athletic side, that list of 100 to 200 people narrows down to about 10 to 20. And so that happens fairly quickly. And then we start looking at more subtle things on the sort of the student side. So I'll give some examples here. So at this point, we're now looking more at the character and fit of this prospective student athlete. We're looking at personality, how they are as a competitor, what kind of mindset they have when they're competing. We're very big on burnout. So there's a lot of student athletes who sort of do almost too much during high school, and by the time they get to college, they're burnt out with their sport, and obviously that's something that we're trying to avoid quite a bit. We're looking for student athletes who are still motivated to play, who still see the next version of themselves, who think that they can actually still improve in the next 4 years at college. So burnout is something that we're very aware of, and something that we're trying to avoid in our recruits. We're looking at independence. We're looking at sort of what kind of student athlete the person is. Are they managing their time well? Are they actually taking ownership of their own training? Or are they always, dependent on their coach or parent or whoever? Generally speaking, I mean, the more independent you are, the more ready you are to join our team, and the better fit you generally speaking are. We're looking at team experience and sort of whether this individual understands that they have the responsibility to their team. So we're sort of trying to see this person, how they might be as a teammate, how they might be as a leader on the team, what kind of role they could be playing there, and whether they're sort of open to that idea of, squash as an individual sport, but as many individual sports in college are being played on a team. So we're just trying to get that feel of, okay, how would that play out with the particular student athlete. We do a lot of background work. So in addition to obviously interviewing the student athlete themselves, we ask around, we talk to other coaches, we talk to their coach, but we talk to other coaches who might have seen them competing that we haven't seen. I mean, we're really sort of trying to do a little bit of background work and try and find as much information as possible about the student athletes. Other interests is important to us as well. We really, I mean, and this might be different with other coaches and different with other sports, but we're looking for sort of, whole-minded athletes, student athletes. We don't want them to just be interested in squash and just to be addicted to squash. It's obviously great if there's a part of them that does that, but we're really big on. We're big believers in the fact that if you have other interests in your life, that you're actually a more balanced individual, and that you're actually probably a better athlete as well if you're not just sort of building your identity around your sports and around your identity as an athlete. And lastly, we look at the fit with the team. So if you get to our short list of 5 to 10 people, we generally invite you for an official visit. An official visit just means that we pay for the trip, and you come and you spend about 48 hours with our teams. And so we look at how you fit in with the team. We ask feedback from our players after you visited, and how you would fit in with the culture that we've created for the teams. So as you can see, there's a lot of things that coaches do in order to sort of get to this final support stage where we offer support to only 2 to 3 prospective student athletes per year. And then obviously it's important to remember that this is the support that we're giving, and we can go only so far as coaches. The final say is really in the admissions office hands when you apply at the end of at the start of your senior year. All right, let me go to the next slide here. So that's kind of the first part of it. Let's go into the second part of it. Just sort of things to keep in mind during the process when you're going through the recruiting and going through the application process. And I've tried to think about myself growing up in Finland and sort of, because this was such a sort of overwhelming and confusing process, I was kind of trying to think of things that I wasn't necessarily as aware as I should have been. So this is not a full list of things to keep in mind, but these are some examples that sort of popped into my head, thinking back to my own process and sort of questions and things that I probably should have asked and kept in my mind. So the first thing really is, if you're serious about studying in the US, you have to make sure that you apply to different tiers of university. So So you might have your dream school, and that I'm calling it the reach school. So if the stars are aligned and things are going well, that's the school that you're going to get to. And you can have a couple of those. You can have sort of a couple under sort of this heading of reach schools. You should have some target schools. So I think being very realistic about it, looking at your grades and looking at the academic profile that gets admitted to certain universities, sort of being realistic about it, having a good list of target schools, and then also being overly realistic about this and saying, okay, sometimes the things don't work out with admissions, even with the target schools. So just having some backup options as well. We see a lot of kids who only apply to Harvard, and that's kind of like it's Harvard or nothing, and we tend to sort of manage their expectations as much as we can. And we talk about this a lot. If you're serious about studying in the US, you have to have a big list. And I know it's a lot of work, but in the end, it is worth it, because the chances are you're going to end up in a place where that looks like you and feels like you and is a fit in many ways for you. And if possible, you can try and arrange an unofficial or official visit. Again, the difference between these two is just really the official visit is paid by the university or the sports team. Unofficial is paid by you. If you have the means and if you have the opportunity, I highly encourage you to visit the university, see the team practice, meet the coach, meet the team, meet other students, see the campus, and sort of, take it treat it as a test of, could you see yourself there for 4 years? Because it's a big decision. So the more information you have before you make that decision, the better. One thing that's really important to understand is that college recruiting starts earlier than you think. Again, this varies in sports, but in college squash, we start offering support September 1st of junior year. Other sports, I know a lot of other sports do that even earlier. So if you're only starting to think about this in your last year of high school, just understand that your options might be limited. And I know there's a lot of guidance counselors and coaches here on this call as well. And I would just encourage you guys, if you see if one of your students or players is interested in this, do your research as early as you can, because it only hurts you if you kind of the process is long and it's tedious. And so if you start late, you might have missed on a lot of opportunities already. I remember thinking that, growing up in Finland, that the matriculation exam, so ylioppilastodistus, would really sort of mean a lot in this recruiting process. And turns out that in a place like Harvard, at least, it matters very little. So the college really looks at your high school grades, and they look at it starting from your freshman year. Some kids become better students throughout their high school. So it's not a deal breaker if you didn't have a great freshman year. If you're able to show an upward trend and show that you're becoming a better student throughout high school, that is significant. But really remind yourself throughout the process that it's really the high school grades that matter the most in this recruiting process, and the matriculation exam really doesn't really matter at all, or very little. As Elizabeth was saying, there's a lot of testing and standardized testing going on. So you might have heard about tests like SAT or ACT or TOEFL. Many schools these days are test optional, but what that really means is that if you test well, it might be in your interest to actually submit that to the admissions committee as a part of your application. One thing that I would say, and sort of hope you understand, that American high schoolers, they prepare for the SAT or ACT exams very early on in their high school career. So U.S. colleges, they understand that international students whose first language is not English, they understand that they're not going to score as high on a standardized test as an American. However, they still expect you to score quite high. So what I would say is, because American students are prepping for these tests very early on, if you have an opportunity, sign up for an online course, and be prepared to take the test a couple of times. It's the first time that you're taking an SAT. I mean, it's quite a nerve-wracking experience. And generally speaking, we actually see a big difference between students taking it for the first time and then the second time. So just being familiar with the test format and the type of questions and the time crunch, it is really helpful. So if possible, sign up for a course and then be prepared to take it, or be prepared to take it many times. I think that Finns, especially compared to American students, Finns generally are quite modest when it comes to their extracurricular activities and just experience in general. Even though that doesn't mean that Finns don't have experience, and Finnish high school kids don't have experience. I mean, many of you have summer job experience. You might be a member of a club at your school, or you might be doing all kinds of things in your life that that you might not think about including in your college application, and that might be just because when you apply to university in Finland, you're pretty much just a number applying to a university. You get some points for your high school degree, and then you get some points for the entrance exam, and that's really it. And the process in the US is very, very different. So yes, they look at your high school diploma. Yes, they look at your SAT scores, but they actually look at you as a human being as well, and take a lot of things into account. So when you're applying, don't be modest. I mean, highlight every possible thing that you do. If you play an instrument, or you have a summer job experience, or you're a leader somewhere, I mean, highlight it, write it in a resume-like fashion, and don't be modest about it, because the competition that you're facing when you're applying to a U.S. college, that's what they're doing. They're highlighting all those things. So you don't want to fall behind on that front. Recommendation letters are a significant part of the common application. So again, Finnish teachers in general, they might not be as familiar with the U.S. system as you would want them to be, and that's okay. But respectfully, obviously, try and sort of work with them and think about maybe sending a few example letters. If you Google great college recommendation letters, you'll find a lot of good examples. You can sort of support your teacher by sort of providing those kinds of things, because what you don't want is a teacher writing a short letter, which might be totally fine and saying nothing bad about you. But again, if your competition is getting all, very, very different and longer recommendation letters, then again, if you can affect this in any way possible, then do it. So guide your teacher in the process if they don't have experience in that, and really try and choose the teachers that know you the best. That's really that gives them the best opportunity to set you up for success and write about you in the classroom and as a person. And lastly, so schools generally look for people who are both interesting but are also interested. So at Harvard, for example, as a part of the application process, every applicant is being interviewed by either the admissions office or an alum who has graduated from the college. And really what they're looking for is that the fact that you are interested in the world, and you are interested in things outside of your sport. So it is really important to highlight those. The fact that if you're applying to a university as a student athlete with a coach supporting your application, the admissions office, they know already that you're very, very good at your sport. So you don't really need to talk about that in your interview or in your essays, in your application. They know that. They know that, and the coach has sort of conveyed all those things. But what you do want to highlight is who you are outside of your sport, and what interests you have, and what kind of student and citizen would you be on campus? What kind of roommate would you be? That's really what they want to know, that you're a well-rounded individual who's interesting and interested. And finally, my last part, I'm checking the clock here as well. Okay, doing okay on time. So life as a student athlete. The one stereotype that I had to sort of talk about a lot while being an undergraduate student in the U.S. Anytime I came back to Finland, it seemed like people thought, oh, you're an athlete at a U.S. college. you've got it really easy. I mean, you're just you do your sports well and you're fine, which is in fact quite the opposite. Again, this is very different from school to school, but I would say most of the time, I mean, you are a student athlete, and the student really is in front of that word athlete for a reason. So again, using Harvard as an example, you need to do absolutely everything as a student that any other student has to do. And in addition to that, you have this challenging challenge of putting about 20 hours of work into your squash on top of that. So I think it's really important to understand that when you're applying to a college in the US, that it is not easy. And it's not easier as an athlete. In fact, you're more challenged. You're more challenged, but that's okay. That's okay, because it provides a more meaningful experience for you because of that. Ironically, so if I look at our students, they actually do better in the classroom during the heart of our squash season. So when they really have to put in that 20 extra hours a week into their squash, they actually do better in the classroom because they just have to manage their time so much better. And once the season is done and they have a lot more free time, it actually becomes a little bit more challenging to manage their time. So something to think about there. As an athlete, I think in Finland, and this is definitely changing, which has been really nice to see. There's a lot of support systems coming up in Finland, but I would say it's still quite hard to continue your competitive athletic career after high school. So a lot of athletes in Finland, in my experience, face this decision on, do I quit this competitive sport or do I turn professional? And that's a pretty big decision to make. And so the one main benefit of the U.S. college system is really this opportunity where you get 4 extra years to play your sport competitively. And you can, during those 4 years, hopefully you'll get a college degree that you have in your back pocket, and then you can make a decision whether you want to continue as a pro or not. We've got a lot of so Harvard Squash right now, we have seven alumni who have graduated from our program in the last 10 years who are in the top 50 in the world in their sport. The men's #1 player right now, Ali Farag, who's from Egypt, he graduated from Harvard in 2014, and at the time he was graduating, he thought, he was studying mechanical engineering. He thought that he was going to become an engineer and move back to Egypt. But he had this competitive itch that he wanted to still sort of find out how good he could get, and now he could do it with a Harvard degree in his back pocket, and he decided to give it a shot and see how he does, and he has now won multiple world championships and is the world #1 player right now. So the U.S. college system can really work as a nice pathway and give you extra time to grow, give you extra time to obviously gain a university degree, and then make an educated and safer decision on what you want to do with your sport after. As I mentioned before, even individual sports are generally treated as team sports at colleges. So squash, obviously being an individual sport, most of our players, they really don't have much of a team experience until they arrive in the US on a college team. So that is very unique, and it's very, very cool. I still look back. I mean, some of my best friends to this date are my teammates from college, and I know that a lot of people will say the same thing. It really added a completely new layer to me as a squash player. I had never I had played for a national team or a league team, but most of my career I competed as an individual, and so to have a group of similar-minded people who are sort of on the same task and trying to accomplish the same things, and it was something really, really cool, and something that I cherish to this date. So even if you're playing an individual sport, coming to the US can actually offer this new layer to it, just from that team perspective. Students and alumni, they often feel very strongly about their universities, and the fact that where you went to school and where you graduated, it can really become a central part of people's identity. So what's really cool about it is that, squash is a relatively small sport, and yet, in our home matches, we can get a few hundred people come and watch our matches, something that I never experienced in Finland. And a lot of those people might never have played squash. They might not even really know the rules, but they're there to support their university, and they're there to support their friends and classmates and all these things. So at a lot of universities, there is this culture of sort of identity around the university, and really sort of this pride around, okay, I go here, so I support all my teams and my friends, and that's been really, really cool to see, and something that I had never experienced before I came here. And lastly, I mean, I was talking a little bit about the Fulbright network. So throughout your life, you're going to have different kinds of networks, and Fulbright can be in one of them. But whatever school you end up in, whatever university you go to, you will have a network through that university, and people really feel strongly about that. In addition to that, you have the team network. So there are people who have gone and played on that same team before and have then gone to do other things in life. Those people will certainly be sort of resources for you when in college and after college. And being a student athlete in the US in general, when you're applying for jobs later on, and you talk about your experience as a student athlete, as a team member, and your leadership experiences, everything that you sort of gained through your 4 years, that has value. And from my personal experience, that has more value in sort of the corporate world than it has in many places in Europe. So here, really, the student athlete experience is really something that people cherish. And so because you're a student athlete and you've gone to a US college and you played on a team, your network is just that much bigger because of that experience. And that is it. That's my last slide. So I'm gonna exit the slides, but I'm gonna also hand it over to Emilia if there's any questions. And I apologize if you hear crying in the background. It's my 1.5-year-old daughter who's home today with me. So there you go.
Thank you, Hamid. Now we have time for a couple of questions. So if you have any questions, you can type them to the chat box. Anne, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question that you have.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I have a question. As you Hamid, know the Finnish men have the mandatory army service to do. How does this work, or how did you manage this question?
So mandatory military service is sort of totally accepted. So we currently have an Israeli team member on our men's team who was actually slightly older when he started college. So he graduated high school and then had a 2-year mandatory military service, and that is totally accepted. In terms of, in case you're referring to sort of NCAA timelines, that doesn't really count to any timelines of anything. So if you've got a mandatory military service, you got to do it, and that's totally accepted on all fronts.
Okay, thank you.
Then we have a question: how can you arrange an official visit to a college?
So an official visit, again, is the one that the sports team pays for, and the first step really is to get in touch with the coach, and sort of see if you are on their short list. So the thing is, obviously, because they're paying for it, they are very selective on who they're gonna bring. So you got to be fairly sort of late in the process if that's happening. The nice thing about if you have the resources to do an unofficial visit, meaning that you pay for all the expenses, that oftentimes, especially earlier in the process, might be the easier way to get a visit. So you might suggest to the coach saying, hey, I happen to be in Boston, later in the year. Would it be possible that I visited campus and met with you and met with the teams? How would you feel about it? And the barrier for them to say no to that is obviously much lower because you're paying for all the expenses. But when it comes to the official visit, it really means that you're late in the process. You're shortlisted already, and that they want to find out more information about you. And so that's kind of, if you've built that relationship with the coach, then that's something that you could ask, or they might ask you.
What about then, Hamid? Are you planning to visit Helsinki in the near future? It would be great to show you the junior squash talents we have at the moment.
I'll be there next summer, so yeah, I'll be sure to check it out.
All right, I think we don't have any additional questions at the moment. Thank you, Hamid. I think it's now, or let's see, we have one more. Let's take this one. So the Ivy League schools have football teams, but no athletic scholarships. Can you tell what kind of grade point average or academic requirements you have to have beside excellent skills in football to have a chance to get into Ivy League?
I can't really comment on other sports apart from squash. My first sort of tip for anyone would be to contact the coaches. So if you're interested in playing football in the Ivy League, then contact every Ivy League coach. I mean, that's 8 coaches, and ask about their sort of academic requirements. And they might not have a black and white answer, but at least they could give you sort of a guide of, okay, this is the ballpark that we're looking for. But coaches, I would say, are definitely your very good and useful resource on that.
All right, thank you. Now it's time to end this webinar. Or Hamedi, do you have time for one more question?
Elizabeth had her arm raised.
I just wanted to add to the question about, even though the Ivy Leagues do not offer the scholarships, the athletic scholarships, they still have to meet those academic requirements that I talked about. So to play football, to play soccer for an Ivy League, you still have to register with the NCAA and meet that 2.3 GPA. So obviously be admitted based on what that school's admissions requirements are, which are going to differ from NCAA. But in order to compete for that school, which is a Division I program, you have to meet those 16 core courses and that 2.3 GPA that we talked about. So those are still in play.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Last final question for today is that what are the chances of getting a Fulbright scholarship if I compete at the highest level under 20 soccer league, and if I apply for thousands of schools, even if it's D1, D2, D3, or other than NCAA schools?
Yeah, I think what I would say to that is, obviously, I would narrow down to a few schools that you're interested in before the application process, just because there typically is an application fee associated with applying to be admitted to those universities. But I think if you're playing at the highest U20 level soccer in your country, there's probably a pretty good opportunity for you to gain a sports scholarship, but I wouldn't have any exact statistics. Every program is going to differ on how many open scholarship positions they have, whether or not the coach wants to give a full scholarship or a partial scholarship or pair that with an academic scholarship. But a lot of that depends on how many outgoing student athletes they have as to how many scholarship spots are opened up on the front end. So it's really going to vary, and I don't have any exact statistics, but I would say, once that recruiting process start reaching out and showing your interest in the programs to get a better idea of what they're offering you.
All right. And now it's time to end the webinar. But if you wish to be in touch with our alumni and grantees who are currently completing their undergraduate degrees in the US, please feel free to contact our outreach ambassadors. We will include the link to their contact information in the follow-up message, and you can also find Hamid's contact information from there. Thank you everyone for joining us today.